Hi, welcome to our webinar about methadone formulations, clinical pearls, and patient experience. I am Dr. Christy Sutherland. I'm a family doctor and addiction medicine specialist. I work in Vancouver's downtown east side at the Portland Hotel Society and as a physician education lead here at the BC-CSU.
And I'm Garth Mullins. I'm part of the BC Association of People on Methadone and host of the Crackdown podcast, and also a methadone patient myself.
And we also have special guest, Dr. Mona Kwan, a clinical pharmacy advisor. So in this webinar, we're going to review the history about the methadone formulation change here in British Columbia, talk about some research that's been published about this transition. We're going to discuss the options we have available for patients here in BC and how to switch around between those options for your patients. And we have Garth here, which is just a delight to talk about the lived experience of people who have been on methadone. So I remember this well. In February 2014, BC removed the generic compounded methadone from the provincial formulary and replaced it with Methadose. So this was a big deal. We had 17,000 people on methadone at the time who overnight switched the brand that they were taking for their medication that they were on every day that we know is a life-saving medication. So it was 10 times the concentration, a different company that made it, and a different taste. It was cherry. You must remember that well, Garth.
Oh yeah, this came as a shock to a lot of people. I heard about it because being in groups like the BC Association of People on Methadone, we kind of watch these things, but I think most people went to their pharmacy one day and they're just like, what's this now? And pretty quickly, I think in the next few days after that, whenever someone got switched in that month of February, early March of 2014, people started feeling the symptoms of withdrawal, so dope sickness. Lots and lots of people were coming to us and saying that, and lots of people started to top up with other opioids from the street.
Oh, I remember exactly the same thing. So this change was because, we were told it was because that Methadose did not require compounding. So the previous compounded methadone came in a powder and was mixed with Tang to be diluted and prepared at each individual pharmacy. And the new formulation didn't need to be stored in the fridge. So this was thought to decrease the potential for pharmacy error in dosing and to decrease diversion. So there were thoughts that some pharmacies were watering down the medication. But there was no consultation with people on the methadone program. It just was a sort of unilateral decision with a massive switch that didn't involve the people on the medication. So what evidence did they use for transitioning formulations? So there was this small 1999 study that was a double-blind, three-way crossover trial that compared methadone pharmacodynamics among a group of 18 people who were switched between Methadose tablets, Methadose liquid, and Methadone discants. They measured plasma levels, and there was no difference between these three groups across the three medications. This study was fully funded by the pharmaceutical company that manufactures Methadose.
And in our attempts to reverse the switch, or at least get the option of the compounded methadone back, this study was constantly quoted to us as being an authoritative source. And once I looked into it, you could see there's 18 people and actually no equivalent comparison of how people did switching from compounded methadone that we have to the Methadose formulation. Its use diminished, and then we actually went and talked this year to Gurevich himself on the podcast. You can listen on episode 2, and even Gurevich, the author of the study, is a little leery of how it was used.
So what happened after this transition? So I feel all of my patients came in and they would say that they felt terrible, basically. They would say this doesn't have legs, that it would wear off more quickly, so they would wake up in the morning in withdrawal. So people who had been stable on a stable dose, like 100 milligrams, for many years, suddenly that 100 milligrams wasn't holding them for 24 hours, and they had reemergence of cravings and then relapse. More pain, malaise, nausea, and then having to top up as their Methadose didn't meet their opiate need.
Yeah, this is the same thing we saw at the BC Association of People on Methadone. And as 2014 wore on, this is when fentanyl was really hitting the drug supply too. So people were topping up off a drug supply that was much more dangerous than it had been in, just a few years ago. So it was a perfect storm, and we certainly started losing members this way. I don't even know how many, but people who were on our board, treasurer died, our president, Charisse Kiwatin, died this February. And she was probably in withdrawal and dope sick a few hours or more of every day, or almost every day, between 2014 and 2019. And that's a form of torture, I would think. It's absolutely terrible.
Oh, totally. I think nausea is one of the worst things in terms of quality of life that people live with. Because we know that people stop medications because of nausea as a side effect. It's just so uncomfortable. And to combine that with pain and malaise, and then having to turn back to the street to figure out how you're going to get money to get drugs, and then having this shift in our illicit market to fentanyl is just, I mean, the risk is huge.
I think there's one message that prescribers could take away from this is if a patient is experiencing withdrawal in the context of an overdose crisis, it's absolutely deadly.
Yeah.
And that's where you take the great measures. Withdrawal isn't punishment for being a drug user. Withdrawal is something that requires medical intervention quick.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as a physician, I know when I was learning about opioids, you know, we used to say that opiate withdrawal doesn't kill anyone. Sort of like alcohol withdrawal, you can die from. But I think we need to sort of re-examine that sort of old medical pearl, because I think it can kill people in the acute phase in terms of like electrolyte imbalances and dehydration and vomiting. But actually, the death from withdrawal is in the days or weeks or months after the prolonged withdrawal is going on, and then the person uses illicit drugs and has an unintentional overdose.
Yeah, so it'll kill you slow or it'll kill you fast,
yeah.
But it'll kill you.
Yeah, so we can no longer sort of have that old medical pearl that opiate withdrawal doesn't kill you.
Certainly my doctor told me that.
Yeah. And yeah, as Garth said, like the timing couldn't have been worse in terms of this shift in our illicit market. So what happened after the transition? So for me, I tried splitting the dose of for my patients or to increase their dose. But we need to remember that increasing a dose will increase the peak plasma concentration, but not prolong the half-life. So you're just sort of making people more sedated at the 4-hour mark, the peak of methadone, but still at 6 a.m. the next morning, they're waking up in withdrawal. I found split doses marginally helpful for people, but it's a lot to go from a once-a-day medication to a twice-a-day medication. You're doubling the sort of pill burden for that person. So we know that medication transitions can have a pronounced biopsychosocial impact on patients and on communities. So in the UK, they changed the methadone formulation in 1992, and this was correlated with an increase of non-prescription opioids, decline in social stability, and an increase in pharmacy break-ins. So no surprise. So we have 3 studies that have been published in BC that have concluded the formulation switch has had significant adverse impacts on patients who are on methadone. So this one, Patient Perspectives of Methadone Formulation Change in BC, Outcomes of a Provincial Survey, showed that 56% reported feeling worse or more dope sick, 50% took additional opioids, and people who reported feeling worse or more dope sick were almost 9 times more likely to take additional opiates compared to those who did not. For me, I feel those numbers are low, actually. Like in my patient population in the downtown east side, I felt that everyone felt worse. What do you think, Garth?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really met people who said methadose is great. I'm doing good.
Yeah, so I have maybe 1 or 2 people in my 600 patients.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one because it's looking at specifically HIV-related outcomes, an interrupted time series analysis. So for people living with HIV on methadone, with this formulation change, 11.5% returned to heroin injection, and there was a 15.9% drop in optimal HIV adherence immediately after the switch. So this has negative impacts for those patients because they would have maybe an increase in their viral load and a decrease in their CD4. But it also has negative implications when we look at public health in terms of that we want everyone optimally treated for their HIV because we know that they're can't seroconvert someone else. So that when we think from a public health perspective with HIV, that this methadone formulation had made things worse for these individuals and also had a negative impact on public health. And in this study by Ryan McNeil et al., 50% of study participants experienced heightened withdrawal symptoms about 14 to 16 hours after ingestion of methadone. So this is a drug that's supposed to have a 24-hour half-life. And so only lasting 14 to 16 hours is not a great outcome. And that it had a disruption in treatment engagement, which I think makes sense. If you're giving someone something that is just not working for them, why would they keep coming back to you to continue to take it?
Yeah, methadone has one job. And if it's not doing that, what's the point?
Yeah. So why do people feel uncomfortable? And the answer is we don't really know. Let me take you back to undergrad. Methadone is a chiral molecule. So just like your hands, they are a mirror image of each other, but you can't superimpose them. So even though they are identical, they actually, you can't overlap your hands on top of each other. So many drugs are chiral, and they have what's called a racemic mixture. In some drugs, both enantiomers are active, and some drugs just one, and some drugs have an inactive enantiomer. So we think that different formulations of methadone may have different ratios of these isomers. And so even though the plasma concentration is normal, because I remember after this switch, I started doing peak and troughs of methadone for my patients, and it was normal. So even though that plasma concentration is normal, so even at the trough of that drug, when someone is sitting in front of you in withdrawal, the trough can have a normal concentration, but it's what that enantiomer is doing on the receptor in their brain that is not enough for them.
So the methadose is in your blood, but not in your brain as much.
Yeah, it's the ratio of the active versus inactive. So in response to this going really badly, we now have some different options here in BC, and this is due to a lot of advocacy on the part of people who are on methadone. So you, Garth, and your incredible team. So we now have different options. So we have the Methadose, we have Methadone D, which is a different brand of methadone that has a different, we think, ratio of enantiomers than Methadose. And we also have available the compounded methadone. So the original formulation that people were on before 2014. For Methadone D, it can be, it's covered for anyone who is on Methadose. You just need to write on the triplicate pad Methadone D in the special instructions.
Yeah, I can't tell Methadone D apart from the original compounded methadone we used to be on. A lot of people say that, but I think for some people it doesn't work, and some people are still looking for the original compounded methadone.
Yeah, and I think that totally makes sense. Like I think about a lot of psychiatric drugs where people are sensitive, like our brains are very sensitive to change. And I have lots of patients, and I think many clinicians do, who are on the brand name or the generic name specifically, and you write on the prescription no substitutions for that patient for different medications because they just can't tolerate a different formulation. And you know, we don't know why, and we don't really question it. And for me, if a patient feels better, then that's what I want. And I don't think that we need sort of randomized control trials comparing different formulations of methadone. I think it's just nice to have options and then to work with the person to figure out where they're comfortable. So Methadone D is clear, colorless, and unflavored. It's 10 milligrams per ml solution, and it's diluted at the pharmacy in Crystal Light or Tang. So it's Health Canada approved formulation of methadone, and it's a regular benefit coverage under the income-based Fair Pharmacare plan, and 100% covered for those enrolled in Pharmacare Plan C, Plan G, and Plan W. And Methadone D is now widely available. So you can speak with your pharmacist colleagues to make sure that they have it in stock. But in general, anyone who is on methadone probably would prefer Methadone D. I have definitely found that in my patient population. And so speaking with pharmacies, we've just switched over.
That's great, yeah.
So it's just a one-to-one conversion. I remember when I first started doing this, I was a bit nervous because people were so in withdrawal and uncomfortable on the Methadose, and then I was doing a one-to-one conversion. I was sort of worried I'd overdose them, but it's fine because it's the same drug, but you just write Methadone D on your usual methadone prescription pad. So clinical indications for transitioning, it's basically just if the patient asks you to, then you do it. So definitely if they have an allergy to Methadose, but if they're just not doing well on Methadose and they would like to try out something different. So if they have ongoing opiate use to top up, if they have withdrawal symptoms, if their cravings are not well managed, and even if for new starts, you can provide options. So sometimes for new starts, I'll start people on Methadone D because sometimes patients come to you and they say, oh, you know, I want to start a methadone. I was talking with my friend, he's on Methadone D and he says it's great. And so you're like, oh, that's wonderful. I'll start you on the thing that you want.
That's good, yeah.
So no need for special authority. So thank goodness we're decreasing some admin burden for physicians. So in addition to the inclusion of Methadone D as a regular benefit, the compounded methadone is now available. And so this is for people who have not benefited from other forms of both, including Methadose and Methadone D. And so your pharmacy partner has to sort of get it ordered in. And so you want to give them a little bit of lag time to make sure they have the medication. So the compounded methadone, I definitely have a few patients who have been really struggling on the Methadose. They feel better on Methadone D, but they still don't feel the same way they did in 2013. And so I've filled out the special authority and gotten them compounded methadone, and they feel better.
So how many people do you have on compounded methadone?
I think just 2 so far. But I may have more, but it's the lag because I have to see them in the follow-up. to see how they feel. But I'm just so happy to have this option again. To have the 10 milligram per mil, it's diluted to 100 mils, just like it was in the past, and it's really wonderful for people.
Yeah, so right now you have to apply for the special exemption. Doctors have to apply for that.
Yeah.
Right, and this is what it looks like. They have to have not done well on methadone, on methadose and Methadone D. And I personally think, and the BC Association of People Out of Methadone thinks, we gotta get rid of that, so that it is between a doctor and a patient which methadone formulation they choose. Hopefully we get there.
Yeah, and I think like what does a trial look like is also patient specific. But the key for this special authority form to have it be successful is it's very helpful to document if the patient had previously been on the compounded methadone. So for my patients who have done the switch over, I sort of write out like in point form. I don't write like, you don't have to write a novel, but just say like this person was stable on compounded methadone. With the switch to methadose, they relapsed and have been struggling. I tried them on Methadone D and they got a bit better, or they didn't get a bit better, however they felt. But I think that they are still chipping. They're still fentanyl positive in their urines. They're still struggling. They're not sleeping well. I think a trial of compounded methadone would be of great benefit to this patient, is what I write. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Mona Kwong to walk us through the provincial access to compounded methadone, including the new compounding procedures and delivery, and the pharmaceutical differences between each option and how they're dispensed at the pharmacy, and details about the coverage process.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mona Kwong. I'm a pharmacist in the community setting in a small community pharmacy, and I'm also the BC CSU's pharmacy advisor at the center here. So I'm going to talk about methadone and just taking you through the history and where we are today in terms of coverage and what's available. Start off with methadone in the past. So in the past, there was compounded methadone, and at that time, any community pharmacy could actually make this within their own pharmacy using a set of standards, etc. They make their own. So essentially, as a summary, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is a powder methadone, was weighed on a scale, then mixed in full-strength tang or equivalent. Full-strength tang just means like it's fully by the recipe and it's not diluted at all. An equivalent is an equivalent product, which I'll go through a bit later on in the slides. So we made in the pharmacy a 1 milligram per mil or a 2 milligram per mil solution, which isn't as common back then. It was a compounded batch at each pharmacy. And then at that time, we measured out each dose for each patient via a graduated cylinder. So I'll show you some of the equipment in the next slide. This is the compounded methadone, the old methadone, as an example for you, a 1 milligram per mil. So for example, on the left-hand side, there's a bottle which contains the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the methadone. We have weighing papers and also weighing trays. There's a little spatula there where we weigh out the powder on a scale. The scale is calibrated according back then to little weights. You'll probably remember this either in different schools, or you probably played around with some of these weights. We also wore masks to protect ourselves from the powder inhalation. After that, what happens is that we mix up a methadone solution and we mix everything together into a jug. And essentially, there's a batch. For example, just on the slide there, it says methadone 1 milligram per mil, tang, shake well. After it's shaken, it's measured out in each individual dose using a graduated cylinder, which is on the right-hand side there. So I'm going to take you through the choices of methadone available today under BC Pharmacare. Similar to many other products out there, there's many different choices in terms of a pharmaceutical company making a product. So for example, some of the blood pressure medications, even though it's one type of medication, there's many different companies. A cholesterol medication, similar again, many different companies, even though it's the same chemical structure of, for example, atorvastatin, which is used for cholesterol. Mood medications, there's many different companies as well. So we have choice right now for methadone. Many different companies are making this. Currently, we're very familiar with Methadose, a 10 milligram per mil cherry orange solution. It's pink in color. It's made by Mallinckrodt, which I've put in the green there. Regular benefit under pharmacare. This is the one described as not having legs. No dilution is required at all. So for example, if the patient is requiring 80 milligrams of methadone, you would be giving at the pharmacy, or the patient would be getting 8 mils of the pink colored solution. 1B is the Methadose 10 milligram per mil, dye-free, sugar-free, unflavored, there's no color. It's currently not available for coverage. It was on an exceptional basis back when Methadone D was not available. There are only a few patients currently on this in the province, so it was grandfathered in. You do dilute it when the patient receives it. It is diluted to 100 mils with orange tang or equivalent. So for example, the patient who's on 80 milligrams of methadone will be given 8 mils of this particular solution mixed in 92 mils of orange tang or equivalent to make 100 mils. So the person would be drinking 100 mils of orange tang, which has the 80 milligrams of Methadose sugar-free in it. As you are aware, number 2, the Methadone D 10 milligram per mil was available. Full coverage, full benefit coverage was started in spring 2019. It's unflavored, orange solution, no color, made by Paladin. It's currently a regular benefit under pharmacare. So please note though, I did note down in the blue section here that in inpatient settings, for example in hospitals, this particular formulation is not usually diluted in tang. It's just given straight up. So it's not unusual if the patient tells you that they got a very clear solution inside the hospital. Because this has been given undiluted in the hospital setting. In the community setting, it has to be diluted to 100 mils with orange tang or equivalent. So again, if the patient got 80 milligrams of methadone, they would be given 8 mils of this clear solution mixed in 92 mils of orange tang or equivalent for a total dose of 100 mils that will be taken by the patient. I will describe right now the compounded methadone solution that is available. So the compounded methadone that will be available or is available right now is going to be made in a 10 milligram per mil unflavored orange solution, so no color at all. There's only one pharmacy in the province that will be making this particular solution, and they will be the people stocking the solution to each dispensing pharmacy in the community setting. So it will be compounded by the Provincial Distribution Center Pharmacy and shipped out to each patient's home pharmacy by the pharmacy filling out a form. It does require a 48-hour turnaround. Non-benefit, it's an exceptional basis, so basically it's special authority. The exceptional coverage started in October 2019. The patient would have had to have trialed Methadose as well as Methadone D. A dilution will be required to 100 mils with orange tang or equivalent. So for example, if the patient got 80 milligrams of methadone, they will be given a compounded solution that contains 10 milligram per mil. So 8 mils will be mixed with 92 mils of orange tang or equivalent in order to get to the 100 mils. So I'm going to talk about what are the other full strength beverages that make up to 100 mils for each dose? What essentially can be used? So the orange tang will be most common. It does contain sugar though, as does the grape flavored Kool-Aid and the Allen's apple juice. There are 2 other options that has been looked at when you look at some studies. That's why these products were available for mixing. Crystal Light Tangerine Flavored is available too, and pharmacists can buy packages. So that you folks know, the grapefruit is artificial flavoring, so there's no need to be concerned about drug interactions at all. And then there's a Crystal Light lemonade flavored package that can be mixed to full strength to make up that portion of the beverage. So these are usually the 5 different things that you will see mixed in with the certain methadone formulations. I wanted to also to touch upon other formulations available because, again, there's different choices out there, different coverages. There's still some methadone tablets available, 1 milligram, 5 milligram, 10 milligrams, 25 milligrams. These are commercial tablets made by Paladin. It's a non-benefit under pharmacare. Private plans may actually have some coverage. It may be used for pain or even an easy carry for holidays, depending on the patient's preference and coverage-wise. No dilution is required at all because it's in a tablet formulation and it's given in a vial. There's also a new formulation that's out recently, and you will hear about it. It's a methadone 10 milligram per mil cherry orange, it's a methadone 10 milligrams per mil cherry oral solution. It is blue in color though. It's sweetened with xylitol. Commercially concentrated solution available. This company is called Sterinova. It's a non-benefit under pharmacare right now, and it's going through processes to get assessed. It is in the market in case you hear about it. Most likely there will be no dilution required simply because it is colored in terms of a blue color. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about the compounded methadone 10 milligram per mil. So what happens? And who qualifies? So for individuals or patients that have not benefited from any reasonable trials of both methadose or methadol D, and methadone is still the optimal OAT option, then this could be considered. So basically, it's an exceptional last resort coverage. It's determined on a case-by-case basis. So you do have to know that there are special procedures to be followed, which can delay a little bit of access compared to commercial options whereby the pharmacy can just order directly the next day from a wholesaler. So it's anticipated because this is new. It will take at least 48 hours to acquire stock at the home pharmacy once a prescription is delivered to the dispensing pharmacy. So I, again, wanted to let you know that there's one central source in the province. It's a provincial distribution center pharmacy, and that's been approved for provision of compounded methadone for this particular program. Procedure-wise, like what do you do? So diagnosis is listed here for you. In our update form, this is exactly what's presented in there. So these are the things that you have to consider when you're writing in the exceptional form. The dose, the duration, details of the response and trial of the methadose 10 milligram per mil. For example, did it last 24 hours? Was it BID? If there's an intolerance, what was the nature and severity of the intolerance? So how was it mitigated? Perhaps a person got transitioned to methadol D. So what was, again, the dose, the duration, details of response and trial? Why didn't it last for 24 hours? Was it BID dosing trial? If intolerance is present again, what is the nature and severity of the intolerance? And just document everything on the form for consideration. So this is a little bit different compared to your normal pharmacare special authority requests. This request for the methadone compounded 10 milligram per mil solution actually requires you to go and fill out a compounded coverage request. Very simply, there is a form specific, which I've put on the slide, and it's also on our update in terms of a PDF. Whereas you can generally use a general special authority request form, but it can cause delays. It's a little bit faster using the compounded coverage request form. So what you have to include on this request when you look at it is the confirmed diagnosis of OUD, or the opioid use disorder. What we mentioned in the last slide, the dose and duration of trial of all the regular benefit methadone medications. So the regular benefit medications were the method dose, cherry flavor 10 milligram per mil, and also the Methadone D 10 milligrams per mil. Any dose adjustments, details, like what I said, nature and severity of intolerance, and anything else that you can put down, please put down here for your patient. What the form is a general compounded coverage request form. So there's a few things that does not need to be included. You don't need a copy of the costing sheet simply because there's only one source, one pharmacy will be making this, and PharmaCare has taken care of the costing factor with that pharmacy. You don't have to include a copy of the actual prescription. Pharmacists will do this portion. The dispensing pharmacy will look after this particular portion. It is also not required to complete sections that are marked there as NA on the slide there. And then forms can be faxed, which is very much preferred because it's easier to track or mail. So your systems potentially can fax this form over to PharmaCare. So what happens after the request is submitted? This request will be definitely classified as urgent. Once the request is completely processed, PharmaCare will notify the prescriber of the decision. So make sure your staff at the front, or the MOAs, or people looking after the paperwork, ensure that they're aware and keep an alert in terms of receiving this notification. Prescribers are then advised definitely to wait until after they've received approval before they write the compounding methadone 10 milligrams per mil. So this means that you might have to do a bridging script, or you might have to cancel the existing script once the approval process has been completed. Estimated turnaround times is around 3 business days. So I'd like to focus a little bit on duration of coverage. It is listed on our update, but I wanted to go over this as well. It's valid from the date the approval is entered on a patient's record on PharmaNet. So basically links every single BC pharmacy and other authorized healthcare providers in the province. The initial coverage, so make sure that in your callbacks for your patients, the initial coverage is only for 6 months. So you might want to recall the patient to look at the special authority in around 5 months' time or 5.5 months' time, depending on what's happening with your clinic. So renewal will be considered upon submission of another written request indicated the patient's current dose and what are the benefits derived from the use of this particular compounded methadone 10 milligram per mil. The renewal will be valid for another period of 1 year. So again, please flag this patient on your system for a recall back in order to submit another subsequent one-time more of a renewal in a year's time. Subsequent renewals, because that's important, will be indefinite. So again, 6 months is the initial coverage. You have to recall back before the 6 months to fill the special authority request. And then it's a year's coverage, and then you have to fill out one more special authority request for indefinite coverage, should this work for the patient. So just really ensure that if you can submit at least 2 weeks prior to an expiry date if required, and tell your front staff and other individuals taking care of the paperwork that a tracking mechanism has to be put in place for anybody on a compounded methadone 10 milligram per mil solution. So this is an example prescription for you. It's a designated methadone prescription pad. Fill out as per usual prescriptions. There's no adjustments really for the other portions on this particular pad. And then on the special instructions, just write compounded methadone. That's important to flag for staff or for any even locums coming in case they miss this. So that you know there will be a new controlled prescription pad a little bit later on, and these how to write the prescription might have to be readjusted a little bit later on, but those type of information will be updated and sent to you when the time comes for a changeover. So from a pharmacy perspective, what happens when we receive a script? When the dispensing home pharmacy receives a script, what the pharmacy has to do is that there is additional form that they need to fill out and affix the compounded methadone prescription form on the lower right-hand side. Then they fax this form over to PDC, which is a provincial distribution center pharmacy. And within 48 hours, like I said, with PDC, a bulk quantity solution of 10 milligram per mil specific to each patient will be coming from the PDC to the patient's home dispensing pharmacy. Usually it's going to be about a week's worth of medication. Then what happens? When the home pharmacy receives the methadone 10 milligram per mil compounded solution, the dose will need to be measured out from this bulk quantity. So, for example, 8 mils will be measured out from this bulk quantity, for which translates to 80 milligrams of methadone. It will then be diluted to 100 mils with Tang. So 92 mils of Tang will be added to make up to 100 mils. Then the pharmacy will dispense and process the prescription through PharmaNet and follow the usual procedures. The only thing that differs for the pharmacists that are listening out there is the drug cost field must be 1 cent, even though it is provided by PDC at zero cost to the home pharmacy. The 1 cent cost is required to trigger a payment of a witness ingestion fee. There are different DINs and PINs, which is in the update that you will need to set up in the pharmacy to appropriately put this through on PharmaNet. What is very different, though, in terms of the procedure of methadone is if a client misses 3 or more days of methadone, not only do you have to cancel the prescription, notify the prescriber as per usual directions, because you do notify every day if there is a miss. The pharmacy, you also have to actually notify PDC so they don't send any more bulk solution to you. Anything that is not used up, because there's a limited shelf life on there, you have to follow all applicable regulations and best practices to destroy that methadone compounded solution that is not used, and make appropriate documentations as per your usual requirements. So that in a nutshell is essentially what's happening with a compounded methadone 10 milligram per mil solution. It is about choice. So there will be 3 different choices out there, and I'll go through again so that you know, just a quick repeat there. There's Methadose, the cherry flavored 10 milligram per mil, no dilution needed. There are some patients out there still on the sugar-free Methadose 10 milligram per mil. It is diluted to 100 mils with orange tang or equivalent. You have the Methadone D, the second choice, available, 10 milligrams per mil, diluted to 100 mils of orange tang or equivalent. And today, in October, we have the addition of compounded methadone 10 milligram per mils, also needing a dilution to 100 mils with orange tang or equivalent.
Okay, so let's talk about how things have been going with the new options. So this is a Canadian Press article because I mean, it just went so badly. I think it really is an example of when people who use drugs are excluded from the table, when policy changes happen, and that I can't think of any other group who as a whole would be just saying over and over for 5 years, we feel terrible. And to have such a slow response, I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. And so it's critical for our patients to have choice, to be able to be on the medication that serves them best.
What you see here is the editorial board of the Crackdown podcast. We're all drug users. We make this radio show together, and a couple of the episodes detail our campaign, our struggle to get methadone options back. A struggle which we don't think we've won yet, and a struggle which is going to include changing the way policy is made so that this sort of thing never happens again. We're sitting here in the boardroom of the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. A lot of these people are also on the British Columbia Association of People on Methadone. And this is what makes the difference between good policy and policy that misses the mark or has unintended bad consequences. That difference is organized drug users. We've actually been able to work alongside of folks like Christy, and that's really helping things out. So please give people the choice as much as you can. The reason why so many of us have such miserable lives is because of the lack of self-determination. So we often wind up with drug habits to begin with because we have never had the agency to make moves the way we want to in our lives. So treatment that also denies us that agency is just going to compound the problem. So give us a little slack and you'll see good stuff.
Yeah, and I think as a clinician, like your days are just more pleasant when you have happy patients who are doing well. Like I'm happy also to see the unhappy patients and have them, talk about their challenges and things like that. But like what a joy to be able to provide something that someone asks for, that they say benefits them, and then they come back to see you and follow up and they're like, Doc, I feel so much better. And you're like, no, I'm so glad. So I would just encourage clinicians to use these tools that we newly have back in our toolkit to offer patients some options.
Think about the last 5 years, and as in 2014 the methadone got weaker, or at least it felt like it for a lot of us, the drugs got stronger and that gap opened up. And that gap is still there, and so the new methadone or the returning methadone options that we have might close that gap for some of us, but it's going to remain, so we're going to need to be looking at those other options too. So if people don't do well on the compound methadone, it's not on you, it's not on it's not on the methadone itself. It's the fact that things never stand still under prohibition. The drugs get stronger and stronger and stronger, and so we have to keep bringing up options, not taking them off the table.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting, that's such a good point, in that the context has changed. So when we apply research, we're applying it from a different time that it's from a heroin market. And so when we think about our dosing schedules and our titration schedules, that the research to support those was done in a different context. So in conclusion, many people on methadone destabilize with this transition from methadone to methadose. And so now we have the option. We can transition them back to Methadone D with no paperwork. You just write it on the prescription. If someone is still not optimized on Methadone D, you can apply for compounded methadone. Make sure to write a nice special authority application so that primary care is happy with you and approves it the first go around. It's early days for having these different formulations and choice for patients, and there's no form of evaluation and research for this. However, I think we just need to believe our patients when they say what makes them feel better and support them in that. And that we just use the regular methadone prescription pad and write Methadone D or compounded methadone in the special instructions.
Can I just say, I have a great relationship with my doctor, and that's really important. It's actually the most important relationship in my life, probably, or one of them, because it's whether I get to have a day or a life or not. It's like whether I'm sick all the time or whether I can go to work and make radio shows and do other stuff. And so that positive relationship I have with her, I want that for everybody. And I think it's about that agency, it's about that moment. And so I just know how important you are to us.
Oh, gosh, you're gonna make me tear up here. I just
by the way, my doctor is
it's not me.
Christy.
It is not me, no, but I just love primary care and I love being a family doctor and I love that longitudinal relationship of trust that you build with your patients over the years. And I think that that's the beauty of primary care, where you're in a community and you're serving that community, and that's your job, is to treat those patients well and to advocate for their health within, like on an individual basis, where I try to call shelters to get my patients from shelter bed, and then to advocate on a systems level for the community that you care for. And yeah, so I just love primary care. So Garth, that makes me happy.
Well, thanks, Doc.
Thanks everyone for listening.
See ya.